The rain had been falling all day, turning the streets into mirrors that reflected the gray November sky. Inside the small corner cafe, Lisa wiped down the same table for the third time, her mind somewhere else entirely. The clock on the wall said 6:30, which meant she still had another 3.5 hours before she could finally go home and collapse into bed. Her feet hurt. Not just the normal kind of tired aching, but the deep bone pain that comes from standing for 12 hours straight. She'd been working double shifts for the past 2 months. Ever since her mom's condition got worse, the medical bills kept piling up and her regular paychecks just weren't enough anymore. Lisa looked around the cafe. It was one of those old-fashioned places that time seemed to have forgotten. Red vinyl booths lined the walls, their seats cracked and patched with duct tape. The coffee machine hissed and gurgled in the corner, making sounds like it might give up any day now. During lunch hours, this place would be packed with office workers grabbing quick sandwiches and coffee. But by this time in the evening, it was mostly empty except for a few regulars nursing cold cups of coffee and scrolling through their phones. She reached into her apron pocket and counted her tips for probably the 10th time that evening. $27.50. It wasn't much, but it would have to do. She needed to stop by the pharmacy on her way home to pick up her mom's medication. After that, she'd have maybe $8 left. Enough for a couple of ramen packets and some bread to last her through the next few days until payday. The bell above the door chimed, pulling Lisa from her thoughts. She looked up and saw her manager, Rick, already moving from behind the counter with his arms crossed. His face had that look on it, the one he got when he was about to throw someone out. A man stood in the doorway, and Lisa understood immediately why Rick was reacting this way. The man was clearly homeless. His clothes were torn and dirty, layers upon layers of jackets and shirts that probably hadn't been washed in months. His hair was wild and matted, his beard long and unkempt. He carried 2 plastic bags filled with what looked like all his possessions. But what struck Lisa most were his eyes. Despite everything, despite the dirt and the exhaustion written all over his face, his eyes were kind. Gentle, even. The man took a hesitant step inside, water dripping from his clothes onto the faded linoleum floor. He didn't look at Rick or Lisa directly. Instead, his eyes swept the cafe, taking in the warmth, the smell of coffee and food. The simple comfort of being indoors. We're not a shelter, Rick said loudly, his voice cutting through the quiet cafe. The few customers who were there looked up, some with curiosity, others with obvious discomfort. You need to leave. The man nodded slowly like he'd heard these words many times before. But he didn't move toward the door. Instead, he spoke quietly, his voice rough but polite. I wasn't looking for a place to stay, sir. I was just wondering if you might have any leftover food, anything you were going to throw away anyway. I haven't eaten since yesterday morning. Rick's expression didn't soften. We don't give out free food. This is a business, not a charity. Now please leave before I call the police. Lisa felt something tighten in her chest. She'd been in situations where she'd had to choose between eating and paying bills. She knew what it felt like to be hungry, really hungry, and she knew what it felt like to be invisible. To have people look right through you like you didn't matter. Before she could stop herself, she stepped forward. Wait, Rick turned to her, his eyebrows raised. Lisa, don't! But she was already walking toward the man, her hand reaching into her apron pocket. Sir, she said softly, what would you like to eat? The man's eyes widened, and for a moment he just stared at her like he couldn't believe what he was hearing. Up close, Lisa could see that beneath all the grime and wear he was probably in his 60s. His hands, clutching those plastic bags, were shaking slightly. I don't have any money, he said, his voice wavering. I know, Lisa replied. It's okay. I'm asking what you'd like to eat. The man's eyes filled with tears. He looked down at his worn shoes, water still pooling around his feet. When he spoke, his voice was barely a whisper. I don't want to be any trouble. You're not trouble, Lisa said, surprised by how much she meant it. Everyone deserves to eat. So please tell me what sounds good. Rick grabbed Lisa's arm, pulling her aside. He kept his voice low but angry. What do you think you're doing? You can't just give away food. It comes out of the inventory. I'm not giving away inventory, Lisa said quietly. I'm buying him a meal with my own money. Your own money? Rick looked at her like she was crazy. Lisa, you work here because you need money. Don't be stupid. She pulled her arm free from his grip. It's my money. I can do what I want with it. Rick threw up his hands and walked back behind the counter, muttering under his breath about bleeding hearts and bad business decisions. But he didn't stop her. Lisa turned back to the man who was watching this exchange with an expression of deep discomfort. He looked like he was about to apologize and leave, trying to avoid causing any more conflict. "Please," Lisa said, gesturing toward one of the booths. "Sit down. You're soaking wet and you look exhausted." The man hesitated for a long moment, then slowly made his way to the booth. He carefully set his plastic bags down beside him and sat on the very edge of the seat, like he was worried about getting it dirty. Lisa grabbed a menu from the counter and brought it over, but the man shook his head. "I don't need to look." "Whatever is easiest. Maybe some soup? And coffee. I'd love some coffee if that's all right." "Of course," Lisa said, writing down his order. Then she added a turkey sandwich, the daily special, and a slice of apple pie. When she went to put in the order, Rick raised his eyebrows at her. "That's a lot of food." "He's hungry," Lisa said simply. She poured a large cup of coffee and brought it over to the man first. His hands wrapped around the warm mug like it was something precious. He took a sip and closed his eyes, and Lisa saw his whole body relax just a little bit. "Thank you," he said softly. "You have no idea what this means. What's your name?" Lisa asked, surprising herself. She didn't usually get personal with customers, but something about this man made her curious. "Robert," he said. "My name is Robert. I'm Lisa. Your food will be ready in just a few minutes." While Rick prepared the order, Lisa went back to wiping down tables, but she kept glancing over at Robert. He sat there quietly, sipping his coffee, looking around the cafe with an expression that was hard to read. Not just gratitude, though that was there. Something else. Something thoughtful. When the food came out, Lisa brought it all over at once. The soup steamed in its bowl. The sandwich was thick with turkey and vegetables, and the apple pie still had a scoop of vanilla ice cream slowly melting on top. Robert stared at the spread in front of him. "This is too much." "It's not too much," Lisa said. "Please eat." She started to walk away to give him privacy, but Robert called out softly. "Miss Lisa?" She turned back. "Why are you doing this?" he asked. His eyes were steady on hers now, searching. "You don't know me." "I could be anyone." Lisa thought about it for a moment. Why was she doing this? She needed every dollar she had. The smart thing, the logical thing, would be to save her money for herself and her mom. But standing there looking at this kind-faced man who was clearly struggling just to survive, she knew there was only one answer. "Because everyone deserves kindness," she said simply. "Because I know what it's like to be struggling. And because if I was in your position, I'd hope someone would help me too." Robert's eyes filled with tears again, and he nodded slowly. "The world needs more people like you." Lisa felt her own throat tighten. She smiled and walked away, letting him eat in peace. As Robert ate, she noticed something. He didn't rush. Despite how hungry he must have been, he ate slowly, deliberately, savoring every bite. He ate the soup first, spooning it carefully. Then the sandwich, taking small bites, chewing thoroughly. He saved the pie for last, eating it with the same careful attention. The other customers in the cafe had been watching this whole thing unfold. An older woman sitting by the window stood up and walked over to the counter. She pulled out a $10 bill and handed it to Rick. "Give that man another coffee and whatever else he wants," she said. "And here's enough for the tip." A young couple in one of the booths did the same thing, adding another $20. Even Rick seemed touched by this, his stern expression softening just a bit. When Robert finally finished eating, he sat back in the booth with a deep sigh. He looked more peaceful than when he'd walked in, like the food had restored something more than just his physical hunger. Lisa brought him a refill of coffee, paid for by the older woman. "How was everything?" "Perfect," Robert said. "Absolutely perfect," he paused, then added, "I don't know how to thank you properly." "You just did," Lisa said. Robert reached into one of his plastic bags and pulled out a small, worn paperback book. "I don't have much, but I want you to have this. It's one of the only things I've kept with me." Lisa took the book gently. It was a collection of poetry, old and well-read, the pages yellowed with age. "I can't take this." "It's yours, please," Robert said. "It's important to me that you have it. There's a poem on page 47. Read it when you get a chance." Not wanting to refuse his only way of saying thank you, Lisa nodded and tucked the book into her apron. "I will, I promise." Robert stood up slowly, gathering his bags. Before he left, he turned to Lisa one more time. His expression was different now. There was still gratitude there, but also something that looked almost like pride, or maybe respect. "You're a good person, Lisa," he said. "Don't ever let anyone tell you differently. And don't ever lose that kindness. The world will try to make you hard and cynical. But please don't let it." "I'll try," Lisa said, feeling oddly emotional. Robert looked around the cafe one more time, his gaze lingering on details like he was memorizing them. Then he walked to the door, paused, and looked back at Lisa one final time. There was something in his eyes that she couldn't quite identify. It almost looked like he wanted to say something more, but he just smiled instead and walked out into the rain. The door closed behind him, and Lisa stood there for a moment, watching his figure disappear into the darkness. She felt strange, like something significant had just happened, though she couldn't explain what or why. Rick came over with her receipt. "That cost you $27.50. Lisa looked at the number. Every penny of her tips for the day. Money she needed for medicine, for food, for the dozens of small emergencies that were always coming up. For a moment, she felt a flutter of panic. What had she done? But then she thought about Robert's face when he'd eaten that meal. The way his whole body had relaxed. The tears in his eyes. And she knew, despite everything, that she'd made the right choice. "Worth it," she said quietly. Rick shook his head but didn't say anything else. The rest of her shift passed in a blur. When 10 o'clock finally came, Lisa hung up her apron, grabbed her coat, and headed out into the rain. She stopped at the pharmacy, using her last $8 to pick up her mom's medication. Then she walked the 6 blocks to her apartment, getting soaked despite her umbrella. Her feet were killing her. Her stomach growled with hunger. She had no food at home and no money until Friday. But as she climbed the stairs to her tiny studio apartment, she pulled out the poetry book Robert had given her. Sitting on her bed, still in her damp clothes, she opened it to page 47. The poem was about kindness, about how small acts of generosity ripple outward in ways we can never predict or measure, about how giving when we have little ourselves is worth more than giving when we have plenty. Lisa read it 3 times, then closed the book and set it on her bedside table. She changed into dry clothes and lay down exhausted. Tomorrow would be another long day. More bills, more struggles, more uncertainty. But tonight she'd helped someone. Tonight she'd made a difference in one person's world. And somehow, that felt like enough. As she drifted off to sleep, she had no idea that her life was about to change in ways she couldn't possibly imagine. She had no idea that the man she'd fed wasn't who he appeared to be. And she had no idea that tomorrow Robert would walk back through that cafe door and say words that would turn her entire world upside down. But that was tomorrow. Tonight, she slept the deep sleep of someone with a clear conscience, someone who'd chosen kindness over self-preservation, and who'd proven that humanity still existed in a world that often felt cold and cruel. Lisa woke up the next morning to her alarm blaring at 5:30. Her body protested as she rolled out of bed, every muscle aching from yesterday's double shift. She stumbled to the bathroom, splashed cold water on her face, and stared at her reflection in the mirror. Dark circles under her eyes. Hair a mess. She looked as exhausted as she felt. Her stomach rumbled painfully. She'd gone to bed without dinner last night, and there was nothing in her tiny refrigerator except a half bottle of ketchup and some wilted lettuce. She made herself a cup of instant coffee, using the last of the packet, and tried to ignore the gnawing hunger in her belly. As she got dressed for work, pulling on her black pants and white button-up shirt, her eyes landed on the poetry book Robert had given her. It sat on her bedside table where she'd left it last night. For some reason, seeing it there made her smile. The memory of his grateful face, the way his whole body had relaxed as he ate that meal, made the empty feeling in her stomach seem less important somehow. The walk to the cafe took 20 minutes. Lisa usually didn't mind it, but this morning the November air was bitter cold and her thin jacket didn't do much to keep it out. She needed a new coat, but that would have to wait. Everything would have to wait until she could get ahead of the bills, which felt like something that might never actually happen. She arrived at the cafe at 6:15, 15 minutes early like always. Rick was already there, setting up for the morning rush. He glanced at her when she walked in but didn't say anything about last night. That was probably for the best. Lisa tied on her apron, checked that the coffee machine was ready, and started setting up the tables with silverware and napkins. By 7 o'clock, the breakfast crowd started trickling in. Office workers grabbing coffee and bagels on their way to work. Construction workers ordering big plates of eggs and bacon. A few elderly regulars who came in every single morning and sat in the same booths ordering the same meals. Lisa moved through her routine on autopilot, taking orders, pouring coffee, bringing out plates of steaming food that made her stomach ache with hunger. Around 8:30, during a brief lull between the early morning rush and the mid-morning coffee crowd, the bell above the door chimed. Lisa looked up from wiping down the counter and felt her breath catch in her throat. A man walked in wearing a suit. Not just any suit, but the kind of expensive, perfectly tailored suit that you see on businessmen in fancy office buildings downtown. Navy blue, crisp white shirt, silk tie, shoes so polished they practically gleamed under the cafe's fluorescent lights. His silver hair was neatly combed, his face clean-shaven. He carried himself with the kind of quiet confidence that comes from success and authority. But it was his eyes that made Lisa freeze. Those same kind, gentle eyes she'd seen last night, looking out from beneath matted hair and exhaustion. It was Robert. Lisa's mind couldn't process what she was seeing. She stood there behind the counter, cloth in hand, mouth slightly open, trying to understand how the homeless man from last night could be standing here now, looking like he'd stepped out of a business magazine. Robert walked toward the counter, and Lisa noticed that every customer in the cafe had turned to look at him. There was something about his presence that commanded attention. Rick came out from the kitchen, wiping his hands on his apron, his expression curious. Robert stopped at the counter and smiled at Lisa. It was a warm smile, genuine, but there was something else in it too. Something knowing. "Good morning, Lisa," he said, his voice completely different from last night. Clear, strong, educated. "I hope you slept well." Lisa tried to speak, but no words came out. She felt like she was in some kind of dream, like none of this could possibly be real. Robert turned to address everyone in the cafe, but his words made Rick's face go completely white. "Good morning, everyone. I don't believe we've been properly introduced. My name is Robert Mitchell, and I own this building." The cafe went completely silent. Even the coffee machine seemed to stop gurgling. Rick looked like he might pass out. "You... what?" Rick stammered. Robert turned back to Rick with a polite but firm expression. "I own this building. In fact, I own this entire city block, 12 properties total. I apologize for not introducing myself sooner, but I had my reasons." Lisa's legs felt weak. She gripped the edge of the counter to steady herself. This couldn't be happening. The man she'd fed with her last $27.50 owned the building. Owned multiple buildings? "I don't understand," Lisa finally managed to say, her voice barely above a whisper. Robert's expression softened as he looked at her. "I know this must be confusing. May I explain?" Lisa nodded, not trusting herself to speak. Robert gestured toward one of the booths. "Perhaps we could sit down." In a daze, Lisa came out from behind the counter and sat across from Robert in the same booth where he'd eaten last night. Rick hovered nearby, looking nervous and confused. The other customers were all staring, some whispering to each other. Robert folded his hands on the table and looked directly at Lisa. 3 months ago, I lost my wife, Catherine. We'd been married for 38 years. She died of cancer, and when she passed, something in me broke. Lisa saw real pain flash across his face, and despite her confusion, her heart ached for him. "Catherine was the kindest person I'd ever known," Robert continued. "She always saw the best in people. She believed that goodness still existed in the world, that people would help each other if given the chance. But after she died, I became cynical, bitter. I started to believe that kindness was dead, that everyone was only out for themselves." He paused, looking down at his hands. "I'm a wealthy man, Lisa. I built a real estate business from nothing, and I've been very successful. But success can isolate you. It can make you forget what it's like to struggle, to need help, to be vulnerable. So I decided to conduct an experiment." "An experiment?" Lisa repeated, her mind still reeling. "For the past 3 months, I've been disguising myself as a homeless person and visiting my properties. The businesses I own, the buildings I lease. I wanted to see how people would treat someone who had nothing. Someone who couldn't benefit them in any way. Someone they could easily ignore or dismiss." Rick made a small choking sound. His face had gone from white to red. Robert glanced at him briefly, then back to Lisa. "I visited this cafe a dozen times over the past 3 months. Different shifts, different days. Every single time I was ignored or thrown out. Sometimes politely, sometimes not. I went to my other properties too. Restaurants, office buildings, shops. Do you know how many people in 3 months of doing this showed me genuine kindness? Lisa shook her head. One, Robert said quietly. Just one, you. The weight of his words hung in the air. Lisa felt tears prickling at her eyes, though she wasn't entirely sure why. Last night, when you spent your own money to buy me food, I watched you count your tips first, Robert said. I saw that you gave me every penny you'd earned. And then I followed you after your shift. I saw you stop at the pharmacy and use your last few dollars for medicine. I saw you walk home in the rain because you couldn't afford a bus ticket. I saw you go into an apartment building that quite frankly should be condemned. Lisa felt her cheeks burn with embarrassment. The idea of this successful businessman seeing how she really lived, seeing her poverty laid bare, made her want to disappear. But Robert leaned forward, his eyes intense and kind at the same time. Do you know what I saw when I watched you last night? I saw my wife. I saw the kind of goodness that I thought had died with her. You had nothing, Lisa. You were hungry and tired and struggling, and you still chose to help someone else. That's not just kindness. That's character. That's humanity at its finest. A tear rolled down Lisa's cheek before she could stop it. She wiped it away quickly, feeling embarrassed to be crying in front of everyone. Mr. Mitchell, Rick interrupted, his voice shaking slightly. I want to apologize for last night. I didn't know who you were. I was just following standard policy about solicitors, and Robert held up a hand, cutting him off. His expression wasn't angry, but it wasn't particularly warm either. Rick, I've been coming into this cafe for 3 months. Every time I came in looking homeless, you threw me out. Last week I came in wearing a regular suit. Not expensive, just clean and neat, and you were perfectly friendly. You even gave me a free refill on my coffee. Rick's mouth opened and closed, but no sound came out. The problem isn't that you didn't recognize me, Robert said calmly. The problem is that you treated people differently based on how they looked and what you thought they could do for you. That's not the kind of business I want to run. He turned back to Lisa. Which brings me to why I'm here this morning. Lisa, I'd like to offer you a job. Lisa blinked. A job? But I already work here. Not as a waitress, Robert said. I want to offer you the position of general manager of all my food service properties. The cafe went completely silent again. Lisa felt like the floor had disappeared beneath her. I don't have any management experience. I never even went to college. Oh, you have something more important than a degree or experience, Robert interrupted gently. You have integrity. You have compassion. You understand what it means to struggle, which means you'll treat employees with dignity and respect. And you showed me that you'll do the right thing even when it costs you personally. Those qualities can't be taught in any business school. Lisa's mind was spinning. What would I be managing? I own 3 cafes, 2 full-service restaurants, and a catering company, Robert explained. All food service businesses. Right now, they're run by managers who care more about profits than people. I want someone who will transform these businesses into places that value both. Someone who will treat employees fairly, pay them well, and create the kind of environment where kindness isn't punished. It's celebrated. He pulled a folder from inside his suit jacket and placed it on the table. The salary is $85,000 a year, plus full health benefits, performance bonuses, and a company car. You'd start immediately, with a month of training to learn the operations. Lisa stared at the folder like it might explode. $85,000? That was more than triple what she made in a year now. That was impossible. That was life-changing money. I can't accept this, she said, even as every cell in her body screamed at her to grab the folder and never let go. It's too much. I'm not qualified. You're more qualified than you think, Robert said, but I understand this is overwhelming. You don't have to answer right now. Take the folder home. Read through everything. Think about it. We can meet tomorrow to discuss any questions you have. He stood up, buttoning his suit jacket. Then he looked at Rick. I'll need you to stay on through the transition period. After that, we'll discuss your future with the company. Rick nodded quickly, looking like he'd been given a temporary pardon from execution. Robert turned back to Lisa one more time. The world tried to make me believe that kindness was dead. You proved me wrong. Now I'm hoping you'll help me prove that good people can also be successful, and that businesses can make money while still treating people with dignity. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a business card. My office is on the top floor of this building. Come by anytime. And Lisa, thank you. You gave me back something I thought I'd lost forever. You gave me hope." With that, Robert Mitchell walked out of the cafe, leaving behind a stunned silence. Every eye in the place turned to Lisa, who sat frozen in the booth, staring at the folder in front of her like it might not be real. Rick slowly approached the table. His face was pale and his hands were shaking slightly. "Lisa, Can I see that?" With numb fingers, Lisa pushed the folder toward him. Rick opened it and his eyes went wide as he scanned the documents inside. An official offer letter on expensive letterhead. Benefit details. A salary breakdown. A job description that included words like full authority over operations and direct report to owner. "This is real," Rick whispered. "This is actually real." The older woman who'd contributed money for Robert's meal last night stood up from her booth and walked over. She put a gentle hand on Lisa's shoulder. "Honey, that man just handed you a miracle. Don't you dare turn it down because you don't think you deserve it. Sometimes good things happen to good people. Let yourself accept it." Lisa looked up at her, tears streaming freely down her face now. "But what if I fail? What if I'm not good enough?" The woman smiled. "What if you succeed? What if you're better than anyone could imagine? Don't let fear rob you of this blessing." One by one, the other customers came over. They congratulated her, encouraged her, shared their own stories of unexpected chances and life-changing moments. Even Rick, despite probably realizing his own job was now uncertain, managed to say, "You should take it. You're a good person, Lisa. Better than most of us." After everyone went back to their seats and the cafe slowly returned to normal, Lisa sat alone in the booth, holding that folder with trembling hands. Inside was everything she'd dreamed of and more. Financial security, the ability to help her mother, a chance to never worry about choosing between food and medicine again. But more than that, it was validation. Someone had seen her, really seen her, and decided she was worth investing in, not despite her poverty and lack of credentials, but because of who she was as a person. She thought about her mom, lying in that hospital bed. She thought about the eviction notice tucked in her purse that she hadn't told anyone about. She thought about all the nights she'd gone to bed hungry, all the times she'd felt invisible and worthless, and then she thought about Robert's words. "Don't ever lose that kindness." Lisa wiped her tears, took a deep breath, and opened the folder. Inside was not just a job offer, it was a new life. And for the first time in longer than she could remember, she felt something she'd almost forgotten existed. Hope. She had no idea what challenges lay ahead. She didn't know if she'd succeed or fail. But she knew one thing with absolute certainty. She was going to try. She was going to take this chance and give it everything she had. Because sometimes kindness doesn't just change other people's lives. Sometimes it changes your own. Lisa finished her shift that day in a daze, the folder carefully tucked in her bag. When she got home that evening, she sat at her tiny kitchen table and read through every document, every detail of the offer, 3 times. Then she pulled out the poetry book Robert had given her and read that poem on page 47 again. It talked about ripples, about how one act of kindness creates waves that spread out in ways we can never predict. Looking at the job offer in front of her, Lisa finally understood what that meant. She'd thrown a pebble into a pond last night, spending her last dollars to feed a hungry stranger. Now the ripples were coming back to her, bigger and more powerful than she ever could have imagined. And this was only the beginning. 3 months had passed since that morning when Robert Mitchell walked into the cafe in his expensive suit and changed Lisa's life forever. 3 months since she'd accepted the job offer that seemed too good to be true. 3 months since she'd moved her mother to a better care facility, bought a reliable car, and signed the lease on an actual apartment with a real bedroom and a kitchen that had more than a hot plate. Lisa should have been happy. She should have been celebrating. Instead, she sat in her new office on the 3rd floor of the downtown building, staring at her computer screen and fighting back tears of frustration. The office itself was nice. Big windows overlooking the city, a real wooden desk, comfortable chairs for meetings. Robert had spared no expense in setting her up for success. But all the nice furniture in the world couldn't change the fact that Lisa was drowning. Her phone buzzed for the 15th time that hour. She glanced at it and saw another message from David, the manager of the Riverside restaurant. The 3rd complaint today about the new policies she'd implemented. Before that, It had been Patricia from the catering company, upset about the revised employee handbook. And this morning, 2 of the senior staff from the main cafe had walked out, saying they refused to take orders from some waitress who got lucky. Lisa put her head in her hands. Maybe they were right. Maybe she had just gotten lucky. Maybe she had no business trying to run 6 different food service businesses when 3 months ago she'd been struggling to make rent. A knock on her door made her look up. Robert stood in the doorway holding 2 cups of coffee. He didn't wait for permission, just walked in and set 1 cup in front of her, then settled into the chair across from her desk. "Rough day?" he asked, his tone gentle. Lisa let out a bitter laugh. "Rough day? Try rough month. Rough 3 months." She gestured at her computer. "David just sent me another email saying the staff at the Riverside location are threatening to quit if I don't reverse the wage increases. Patricia says the new hiring policy is unrealistic and idealistic, and apparently I'm now known in the company as that charity case who's ruining everything." Robert sipped his coffee calmly. "What did you expect?" The bluntness of his question caught Lisa off guard. "What? What did you expect?" he repeated. "You've been here 3 months. You've raised minimum wages by 30%, implemented policies to hire people with disabilities and criminal records, created a program to provide free meals to anyone who asks, and restructured the entire management system. Did you think everyone would just happily go along with it?" Lisa felt her frustration boiling over. "I thought I was doing what you hired me to do. You said you wanted someone who would treat people with dignity. You said you wanted businesses that valued people over profits. I'm trying to do that and everyone hates me for it." "Not everyone," Robert said quietly. "But yes, many people do. Change is threatening, Lisa, especially to people who've been doing things the same way for years." "Then maybe I'm not the right person for this job," Lisa said, and she hated how defeated she sounded. "Maybe you should hire someone with actual experience, someone who knows how to get people to respect them." Robert set down his coffee cup and leaned forward. 3 weeks ago, I reviewed the customer satisfaction surveys across all our properties. Do you know what I found? Lisa shook her head. Scores are up an average of 18%. Reviews on social media have gone from 3.5 stars to 4.2 stars. We're getting mentioned in local blogs and news sites for our community involvement and ethical business practices. He pulled out his phone and showed her an article. This piece ran yesterday. It's about how our businesses are leading the way in creating inclusive workplaces. We've had 15 requests from other companies asking about our hiring practices. Lisa stared at the article, not quite believing what she was reading. But the complaints are coming from about 12 people, Robert interrupted. 12 people out of over 80 employees across all locations. The vocal minority always seems louder than the satisfied majority. He leaned back in his chair. Let me tell you about David, the Riverside manager. Yes, David has been with the company for 8 years. He's efficient, his location makes money, and on paper he's a model employee. Robert's expression hardened slightly. He's also been systematically underpaying staff, keeping the difference in the budget for his own bonuses. He's been hiring only a very specific type of person, young, attractive women, and has at least 3 harassment complaints that were settled internally before you arrived. Your policies threaten his entire operation. Lisa felt sick. Why didn't you fire him? Because I didn't know the extent of it until you started changing things, Robert said. Your new policies brought everything to light. The transparency requirements, the anonymous reporting system, the fair wage structures. They exposed what was really happening. David isn't upset because you're incompetent, Lisa. He's upset because you're forcing him to actually follow ethical practices. So what do? You fire him, Robert said simply. Today, I've already consulted with our lawyers. We have documentation of policy violations going back years. He's been given multiple chances to adapt to the new standards, and he's refused. Patricia, too. She's been skimming from the catering budgets for 2 years. Lisa felt like the floor had dropped out from under her. You want me to fire them? I don't want you to, Robert said. I need you to. This is part of leadership, Lisa. Making hard decisions. Standing by your principles even when it's uncomfortable. But what if I make things worse? What if the Riverside location falls apart without David? What if it thrives? Robert interrupted. What if promoting someone who actually cares about the employees and customers makes it better than it's ever been? What if giving Patricia's job to someone honest and ethical transforms the catering company? He stood up and walked to the window, looking out over the city. You know what your biggest problem is, Lisa? It's not lack of experience or education. It's that you don't believe you deserve to be here. You keep waiting for someone to tell you it was all a mistake, that you should go back to being a waitress and let the real professionals handle things. His words hit harder than Lisa expected, because they were true. She did feel like an imposter. She did keep waiting for everything to fall apart. But here's what I see. Robert continued, turning back to face her. I see employee retention up 40%. I see people applying to work for us because they've heard we treat staff with respect. I see customers specifically choosing our locations because of the atmosphere you've created. I see a young woman I hired from a homeless shelter who's now training to be an assistant manager. I see a man with a criminal record who's working in our kitchen and supporting his kids for the first time in 5 years. I see change happening, Lisa. Real, meaningful change. But the profits are down 4%, Robert finished for her. 4%. After implementing major raises and new programs. That's actually remarkable. And do you know what every business consultant I've talked to says? They say that in 12 to 18 months, these changes will result in higher profits than we've ever seen. Because good employees, good reputation, and customer loyalty are worth more than squeezing every penny out of operations. He walked back to her desk and placed a folder in front of her. These are the termination papers for David and Patricia. Also in here are promotion recommendations for 3 current employees who've shown real leadership under the new policies. People who understand what you're trying to build here. Lisa opened the folder with shaking hands. Inside were detailed reports on David and Patricia's violations, along with documentation of everything they'd done wrong. But there were also profiles of other employees, people she'd worked with over the past 3 months, people who'd embraced the changes and stepped up. You can do this, Robert said softly. I know you can, but you have to believe it yourself first. After Robert left, Lisa sat at her desk for a long time, staring at those termination papers. Her mind kept going back to that night 3 months ago, when she'd spent her last money to feed a hungry stranger. She'd been scared then too. Scared that she wouldn't have enough, that she was making a mistake, that choosing kindness would cost her too much. But she'd done it anyway. The next morning, Lisa called David and Patricia into separate meetings. Her hands shook as she delivered the terminations. Even with HR present and everything properly documented, David's face turned red with anger. He called her names, said she'd run the company into the ground, that she was just a stupid waitress playing dress-up in a job she didn't deserve. Lisa let him vent. Then, with a steadier voice than she felt, she said, "You're right that I was a waitress. I know what it's like to be on the other side of management. I know what it's like to be treated like you don't matter. That's exactly why I'm the right person for this job, because I won't forget where I came from, and I won't treat people the way you've been treating them." Security escorted him out. Lisa went to the bathroom afterward and threw up from stress and anxiety. But she'd done it. Patricia's termination was quieter, but no less difficult. The older woman cried, begged for another chance, said she had bills to pay. Lisa felt terrible. But she also thought about all the people Patricia had stolen from, all the money that should have gone to good employees and good causes. "I'm sorry," Lisa said. And she meant it. "But these are the consequences of your choices." The hardest part came next. Lisa had to go to each location and address the staff, explaining the changes and introducing the new managers she was promoting. At the Riverside restaurant, she stood in front of 30 employees, many of whom looked at her with skepticism or outright hostility. "I know a lot of you are upset," she began, her voice wavering slightly. "I know you think I'm too young, too inexperienced, too idealistic. Maybe you're right, but I want to tell you why I'm doing what I'm doing." She told them about being a waitress, about working doubles and still not having enough money, about choosing between food and medicine, about what it felt like to be invisible, to have people look right through you like you didn't matter. "I'm not here to run this company into the ground," she said. "I'm here to build something different. A place where employees are paid fairly, treated with respect, and given real opportunities to grow. A place where we serve good food and make good money, but not at the expense of human dignity. And yes, it's going to be uncomfortable for a while. Change always is." She paused, looking around at their faces. Some still looked skeptical, but others seemed to be listening. Really listening. "I'm going to make mistakes," Lisa continued. I'm going to need your help to figure things out. But I promise you this, I will never forget what it's like to struggle. I will never treat you like you're disposable. And I will fight every day to make this a place where you actually want to work." The room was quiet for a moment. Then a young server in the back raised his hand. "Is it true you're giving us all health insurance?" "Yes," Lisa said. "Full coverage starts next month. And the raises? Already in your last paycheck." "What about the meal policy?" someone else asked. "David said you were crazy for offering free food to homeless people." Lisa felt her spine straighten. "The meal policy stays. Every location will provide 1 free meal per day to anyone who needs it. No questions asked. Because I've been that person who needed help. And in a better world, we all look out for each other." A woman near the front, one of the cooks, started clapping. Slowly, hesitantly, others joined in. It was an overwhelming support. And Lisa knew she still had a long way to go to win everyone over. But it was a start. Over the next few weeks, things slowly began to change. The new managers she'd promoted threw themselves into their roles with enthusiasm. Customer complaints decreased. Staff who'd been on the fence started seeing the benefits of the new policies and became supporters. The free meal program started generating positive press and business actually increased. But there were still challenges. A board meeting was scheduled for the end of the month, and Lisa knew that some of the senior board members were not happy with her leadership. They'd been pushing Robert to replace her with someone more experienced. The 4% profit decrease, while understandable, was ammunition they were using against her. Lisa spent her evenings preparing for that meeting, compiling data, creating presentations, rehearsing arguments. She barely slept. The stress was taking its toll. She'd lost weight, had dark circles under her eyes again, and sometimes found herself crying in her car before driving home. One evening, as she sat in her office long after everyone else had gone home, her phone rang. It was her mother. "Sweetheart, when was the last time you ate?" her mom asked, her voice weak but concerned. "I had coffee this morning," Lisa said absently, staring at her computer screen. "Lisa Marie, you listen to me. I didn't raise you to work yourself to death. Not even for a good cause. Mom, I can't fail at this. I can't. Do you know how many people are counting on me? How many employees need these policies to stay in place? If I lose this job, if you lose this job, you'll still be the same person who gave her last dollar to feed a hungry man," her mother interrupted firmly. "Success isn't measured by whether some rich board members approve of you. It's measured by whether you stayed true to who you are." After hanging up, Lisa sat in the darkness of her office, thinking about her mother's words. She thought about Robert, walking into that cafe in torn clothes and testing humanity. She thought about all the employees who were thriving under the new policies. The single mothers who could finally afford childcare because of better wages. The young man with a disability who'd been given a real chance. The former homeless woman who now had a steady job and an apartment. She thought about the free meals being served every day, and the thank you notes customers had sent, and the way the atmosphere in all the locations had shifted from tense and corporate to warm and welcoming. Maybe the profits were down 4%. But the humanity was up immeasurably. Lisa opened her laptop and started revising her presentation for the board meeting. Not just facts and figures this time, but stories. Real stories about real people whose lives had changed. Because in the end, that's what mattered most. She didn't know if it would be enough to convince the board. She didn't know if she'd still have a job after next week, but she knew one thing with certainty. She wouldn't compromise on the principles that had gotten her here. She wouldn't sacrifice people for profits, wouldn't go back to treating employees like disposable resources. If the board fired her for that, then so be it. At least she'd be fired for doing the right thing. As Lisa finally packed up to go home that night, she noticed the poetry book Robert had given her still sitting on her bookshelf. She pulled it out and turned to page 47, reading that poem about kindness one more time. The last line stuck with her. The brave choice and the easy choice are rarely the same. Lisa smiled, closed the book, and headed out into the night. She had a board meeting to prepare for, and she was going to give them everything she had. The future was uncertain. The challenges were real. But Lisa was finally beginning to believe what Robert had seen in her from the start, that sometimes the best leaders aren't the ones with the most experience or the fanciest credentials. Sometimes the best leaders are the ones who've struggled enough to never forget what really matters, and that made all the difference. The morning of the board meeting, Lisa woke up at 4 in the morning, unable to sleep. She'd been tossing and turning for hours, running through her presentation in her mind, imagining all the ways it could go wrong. Her stomach was in knots. She couldn't eat breakfast, could barely even drink water without feeling nauseous. She arrived at the office building at 6, 2 hours before the meeting. The sun was just starting to rise, painting the sky in shades of pink and orange. Lisa sat in her car for a few minutes, gripping the steering wheel, trying to calm her racing heart. Her phone buzzed. A text from her mother. "You've got this, sweetheart. Remember who you are." Lisa closed her eyes, took a deep breath, and got out of the car. The boardroom was on the top floor, a large space with floor-to-ceiling windows and a massive oak table surrounded by leather chairs. Lisa had only been in here once before, during her initial introduction to the board 3 months ago. Back then she'd been so nervous she could barely speak. Today she felt different. Still nervous, but there was something else too. Determination maybe, or just the knowledge that she had nothing left to lose. She set up her laptop and projector, testing the presentation 3 times to make sure everything worked. She arranged printed packets at each seat. Data, testimonials, financial projections, everything she needed to make her case. At 7:45, Robert arrived. He was wearing one of his immaculate suits, but his expression was warm and encouraging. "Ready?" he asked. "No," Lisa said honestly. "But I'm going to do it anyway," he smiled. That's the spirit. The board members started arriving at 8. There were 7 of them in total, not counting Robert. Lisa had met them all briefly, but didn't know most of them well. There was Margaret, a woman in her 60s who'd been on the board for 20 years. Thomas, a stern-looking man who owned a chain of hotels. Victoria, younger than the others, probably in her 40s, who ran a consulting firm. And 4 others whose names Lisa had memorized, but whose personalities remained largely unknown to her. The most intimidating was Gregory, the vice president of operations. He was the one who'd been most vocal about his opposition to Lisa's leadership. He'd worked with the company for 15 years and made it clear he thought Robert had made a huge mistake, hiring someone with no experience. As everyone took their seats, Lisa noticed Gregory whispering something to Thomas, who nodded grimly. Her stomach clenched tighter. Robert called the meeting to order. "Thank you all for being here. As you know, today we're reviewing the first quarter results since Lisa took over as general manager of our food service operations. Lisa has prepared a comprehensive presentation. I ask that you hold your questions until the end and give her your full attention." Lisa stood up, her legs feeling shaky. She clicked to the first slide of her presentation. "Good morning. 3 months ago, Mr. Mitchell gave me an opportunity that changed my life. Today I want to show you what I've done with that opportunity and where I believe we can go from here."